Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining me to watch the making of my Aurora Borealis painting. I'm so glad you're here. These are all the supplies that I use to paint my alcohol ink art. Instead of isopropyl alcohol, I use grain alcohol. This is Graves instead of Everclear. And I make my own alcohol ink blending solution by using this glycerin. And I have an old bottle from Ranger of blending solution. I just fill it up with my grain alcohol and add 4 or 5 drops of the vegetable glycerin, and I save a lot of money that way. I also use Ranger inks. This one is amethyst, nice dark purple, and this one is pistachio. But note that later in the video, I actually switched to patina. It's a little bit better. And this is my favorite Copic dark blue. It's B39 Prussian blue. It's really great for dark nighttime skies. And then I have 2 jars. One is to rinse out my brushes with the dirty ink, and the other one is for clean alcohol. Further one has the dirty ink and just a selection of brushes at my disposal. And now you'll see I start to paint and I get a phone call. So pardon the interruption. You'll see ink already on my paper towels in a second. So I started over just so that you wouldn't miss anything. So first thing I do is uncap everything. Yeah, see, there we go. There's my dirty paper towels. So I'm starting again for you guys. So the first thing I do is I grab my alcohol ink blending solution and I flood the entire subway tile with the alcohol ink blending solution. And I just dip my brush in the alcohol, spread it around a bit, get it all over the surface. This is the trick, guys. Make sure it is absolutely wet with that blending solution first. And now I'm just blocking in that dark blue sky. I'm going to add a little bit of the patina next. Well, spread it around a little first. La la la, la la la. Okay. So now I took the patina and I'm just carefully putting it next to the blue. I'm not running it into the blue, I'm just putting it next to it. And now I'm adding some of that amethyst color for an extra something something. And dip it in the alcohol, and now I'm kind of just spreading it around a little bit with the brush. Remember guys, this is really soaking wet ink, and that's all because I have the alcohol ink blending solution down first. So when I initially made this, I had my fan running in my ventilation box. You could see on the right hand side, that's the wall of the ventilation box. You can see on my YouTube channel, Worthington Fine Art, an explanation of my ventilation box in case you're curious. It's something my dad made to suck the air out the window so that the fumes are not going towards me, but away from me and out the window. My dad's a genius and he's amazing. So I'm just blending a little bit. At one point, you'll probably see me blow the ink, and then I just push it aside and let it dry. Yeah, there's my head in there. I just blew on it a little bit. And I'll just push it aside and let it dry. Now, folks, you want to make sure this is really dry before you start doing the stars or the trees. So while it's drying, here I'm pushing it aside. La la la, push it aside. I'm going to take another tile and use my time while it's drying to block out the sky for a mini subway tile. This one's 2 by 3 inches. I'm sorry, this is 1 by 3 inches. And again, just spread the blending solution all over the tile. Make sure that's soaking wet. And then I just start blocking in the dark ink. That again is the Prussian blue B39 from Copic. Love Copic colors. Seriously, guys, if you don't have any inks from Copic, make the investment and get some. Blick has a sale if you buy 6 at a time. I would highly suggest looking at them, especially the grays. The grays are my favorite. They have warm grays, they have neutral grays, and they have cool grays. And those neutral grays are gold. They do not change color when you add blending solution or alcohol to them. They don't cast blue or sometimes green or sometimes pink. They are pure gray. Amazing. And you'll see later in this video, I actually use one of those grays, and I'll explain once we get to that point. Okay, so I did my little mini guy. Now I'm just going to move that aside. Oops, I see the top edge is missing just a little tiny bit of ink. La la la. I'll just spread it around a little, and then I'll scooch that over out of the way so we can get started on my 3x6 subway tile. Good, perfect. Okay, push it aside. Go ahead, push, 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 push. La la la. There we go. Okay. So now that while that one's drying, I will paint the subway tile. So first thing I do, ready for this? I take a old toothbrush and I dip it into that clean alcohol, blot it just a little on the paper towel, and then I flick it. Just flick with your thumb, just a random spray onto the background, and that'll give you like a little indication of some stars, which is a really great way to start your stars. Now, I did a little bit on the top one too. That one came out really nice. I'm looking at it right now. I think it's terrific. But now I'm going to take a number 2 paintbrush. It's just a nylon watercolor brush. I bought it Blick. I've had this brush for quite some time. I take good care of it. Rinse it out with alcohol, and then maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, I wash it out with some soap. Now what I'm doing is I'm dotting in those stars, just using clean alcohol. That's it. And you note that I blot on that paper towel first. And then as I make the stars, I'm taking away the ink from those spots. I'm not adding white ink at all. I'm removing ink. So the white that you see is the white of the tile. So I will just dot a bunch of stars in, wipe it on the paper towel, da-da-da. Just dot it, blot, dot, blot. I know this is getting boring. Yeah. Dot, 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 blah, blah, blah. Thanks for sticking with it, guys. Okay, now I want to show you a tool that I love to use instead of that paintbrush. This is called a Fantastics. This thing is literally fantastic. It has a foam tip, and if you dip it in the alcohol, I just blot it a tiny bit so I'm not, getting big blobs of alcohol on my piece. It sucks into the foam of this stick, and you can use it to just dot in those stars, which I find to be a lot quicker than using a paintbrush. So after every couple of stars, I just blot on the paper towel just to clean the tip off a little bit. And then periodically I'll dip it back in the clean alcohol and I'll just wipe off that excess color that will accumulate on the tip. Kind of neat, huh? I actually highly recommend getting a package of these Fantastics. They are literally only like $5 at Michael's. I think if you have a coupon for 40% off, you can get it even cheaper. They come in a package of 4. They have 2 pointy tips along with 2 rounded tips. And they are terrific for removing alcohol from a tile or maybe ceramic tile paper or craft plastic. I've also used it on Yupo, but remember guys, it will stain your Yupo paper. The ink will stain your Yupo paper. So you could wipe a lot of the ink away, but you're still going to have a trace left on your Yupo paper. So I keep dipping into the alcohol, dotting in those stars, wiping it on the paper towel over and over and over, blah, blah, blah. I know it's going to get a little boring. I'm bored already. Ho hum. But You get the idea. I'm going to just fast forward through this a little bit until we get to the next part, okay? Okay, now that the stars are done, I want to show you my favorite dark gray, which actually I think looks more like a black. It's Copic N10 Neutral Gray number 10. This stuff is awesome, folks, and I highly recommend using it as your black. It doesn't cast any weird colors like some of the other blacks from Ranger or Pinata. It's pure black. So, oh, wait a minute. I forgot to do something. I forgot to put the caps on my colors. And as you can see here, I have pistachio, patina, and amethyst. And I have 3 caps sitting on my table. Which cap goes with which color? If I mix up the pistachio and the patina, it's not that big of a deal because they're close in color. But what I like to do is dip my brush into alcohol, swish it around in the lid of the cap, and then wipe the color on my paper towel so I can figure out which cap goes to which color. This works fabulously, especially if you have a yellow and let's say a dark blue. You kind of don't want to mix those up because you can contaminate your yellow. So that's my little tip and or trick for keeping your colors clean and uncontaminated. Okay, so now I'm ready to do the bottom part with the trees. I'm going to put a little bit of that Copic N10 Neutral Gray into my paint palette. I like to paint out of well palettes because the ink will dry out a little quicker in a palette rather than like spreading it on just like another tile or something to use as a palette. In the well, it sort of gums up a tiny bit and it gets a little thicker. And when you have a thicker ink, it's easier to paint on top of ink that's already laid down. So the first thing I'm going to do is paint the very bottom of the tile just to lay in some groundwork, I guess for lack of a better description. I'm laying in the ground. And then I'm going to have a nice black bottom surface, and then I can grow my trees from there. So just painting the bottom and get that all nice and black. Sometimes the color will lift a tiny bit and you'll get like some little gray or even white streaks because the tile is showing through. But don't worry, just, paint over it again with the black ink. And you can see it's starting to get a little bit gummy, which is perfect for starting to paint in the trees. I love it. Now, I just showed you the brush. It's a number 2 nylon brush. And I have to tell you, the number 2 nylon bristle brush that I bought at Blick is probably my favorite brush to paint with. And if you know any of my art by now, I like to paint teeny tiny little 2x2 tiles. And I mean, not just these auroras. I do things with tons of detail, like, I just did a little sloth recently. I've done anything from an elephant to a butterfly. Most of these tiny paintings, I use the number 2 brush. Now, why would you use a number 2 brush? I thought you painted with an eyelash. That's what some people have actually said to me. Vera, you must paint with an eyelash, which I think is really funny because I don't even use a 000 brush or even a 10-0 brush, which really is like an eyelash. Instead, I prefer the number 2, and I'll tell you why. If I use the 10-0, I will be dipping my brush into the ink constantly. When I use the number 2, it holds a lot of ink. And if you have a good quality nylon watercolor brush that you take good care of, you can make a nice fine point with the tip of your brush. Now you'll see I'm painting quite a lot of little details in these trees. As I'm painting this little, I guess, pine tree, I'm sort of thinking about where I'm going to put the next tree. And I'm also thinking about what kind of tree do I want in there? Do I want another pine tree, or do I want, just like a regular like oak tree or something like that that lost all its leaves? Because remember, we usually see Aurora Borealis in real life in very, very, very cold northern conditions. So one would assume that there's no leaves on the trees. So I'm just going to figure out where that other little tree is going to live. Maybe I will go through my iPad, which I like to have on the left side of my desk, so that way I can refer to, like, for example, picture of the sloth. Yeah, what does the sloth look like? Okay, here's my iPad and my photographic reference so I can get the sloth looking perfectly. Well, I'm not a brilliant genius when it comes to painting trees. I sort of need to look at something. Yeah, that was my adorable little 9-pound dog barking in the background. She's in bed with my husband watching TV right now, and I'm sure she just saw a dog or a cow or some other animal on TV, and she decided she wanted to play, so she barked at it thinking it's going to come out of the TV and play with her. I don't know. Well, anyway, sorry for that interruption. So like I was saying, I'm not a genius when it comes to painting trees, but I'll look at photos for inspiration for the shapes of the trees, and I usually don't copy them exactly. I just look at them to get the feeling for how they're growing and, which direction the branches are going, and I sort of make it up a little bit as I go along. So now, dun-da-da, I'm going to paint one of the teeny tiny little trees. Wish me luck. This is one of the little oak trees that I was thinking of painting over here. He sort of lives, out on his own. He's not really part of the pack of pine trees, but that's okay. We don't like to make all of the trees look exactly the same. So as you can see, I'm still using that number 2 brush, and I am carefully painting in those little tiny branches. And the way I do it is by just using like a very, very light touch. If you use brushes regularly, you'll know that if you use a very light touch, you'll get a thinner line. But if you use a heavier touch, those bristles are going to spread out and give you a wider line. So if you just barely touch the surface of your tile, you'll be able to paint those teeny tiny branches as well. I've also used very thin liner brushes. I have one over here if I can find the number for you real quick so I can let you know what I use. It's the 10-0 liner brush, which I also got at Blick. It's another one of those really nice quality watercolored nylon brushes. And if you are getting nylon brushes in the variety pack for, $9.99 and there's like 10 brushes, stop. If you want to paint fine details and, things that maybe are a little bit more realistic with a lot of, little hairs or little eyeballs or what have you, branches. I don't know what you're painting, but I'm just thinking, about the little critters I paint. Yeah, I paint like eyeballs and hairs and and little faces and cute little things. But using better quality brushes actually saves me money in the long run, because that number 2 brush I'm painting with, I've had for, I want to say, like at least 6-8 months, maybe even longer than that, because I take care of my brushes. I clean them out with clean alcohol at the end of every painting session, And then maybe once a week, once every other week, depending on how much I'm painting, I'll just take my little pile of brushes over to the sink and just use some regular hand soap on those brushes and give them a really good washing. And after I just like gently blot them on a towel, I'll take the tips of the watercolor brushes and bring them to a nice point and let them dry like that. I also do that after I wash them in the alcohol, just because I want that nice fine tip for the next time I want to use that brush. I also want to mention here that there's really no wrong or right way to painting your trees. Do what feels good. Just paint, whatever you feel in your heart. Some are going to be taller than others. Some in the distance might be just like little nubs, like you see at the bottom. I'm just painting the tops of some trees that might be in the distance. I don't think there's really a right or wrong way to paint your trees. I have multiple photographic references that I use for my trees. In fact, I like to take pictures out the window of a train or a car. Hopefully I'm not driving at the time, me driving the train. Haha, that's funny. But if I'm driving a car and I'm stopped at a light and I see an interesting shaped tree, I'll take a picture of it and then I'll export it to my iPad when I get home, and I'll save it as a shape of a tree that I can refer to because maybe I'm getting bored with the tree shapes that I've been painting and I'd like to put in something that looks a little different. So maybe that's a pretty good tip for you guys that are daring enough to listen to this entire video. Thank you so much. It's amazing you're listening to me just babble on about my painting technique. And honestly, I'm really honored that you're here and you're still listening. So thank you so much. That is really nice. And I really appreciate that. And really, I'm honored that you're still with me and listening to my every word. So anyway, I wanted to say that you do you when you're painting your Aurora Borealis, Northern Lights painting, and just have fun with it. Paint your trees however you're feeling. If you feel like painting one really, really big one, go for it. That one's way in the foreground then. And if you paint some really tiny trees along the horizon, those are in the distance. So just, paint what you're feeling and let your brush flow and, paint your happy little tree. Like, not to quote Bob Ross or anything, but, paint a happy tree. Whatever makes you feel happy, paint it. I think we might be getting a little bored watching me paint all these little teeny trees. So in a couple of moments, I think I'm going to stop and time lapse the rest because the majority of this video is me painting the trees. That's the longest portion of the video, and I'm trying to get this down to under a half an hour as opposed to the original, which was a full 42 minutes. So I think it's coming up soon. I'm going to just, let it fast forward, let it do its thing, and just enjoy it. Before we move on to the time-lapse portion of this, I just wanted to mention something real quick. At the beginning, I showed you my bottle of grain alcohol, and I just want to tell you why I use that instead of isopropyl alcohol. Yes, it's more expensive. Yes, it's harder to get. I'm on Long Island. They don't sell this grain alcohol on Long Island. I get it from a good friend of mine who lives in Connecticut. It's a nice excuse to get together with him, But this 190 proof grain alcohol is actually better to breathe in the fumes from that rather than the fumes of isopropyl alcohol. Isopropyl usually gives me a headache, and I don't get a headache at all with Graves. But to be fair, I paint within my ventilation booth, so the fumes are sucked out the window through the fan, so I really don't smell it at all. Okay, here we go. I'm going to get into the time lapse portion, and I'll just let you watch this and then I'll narrate the next bit. Okay, cool. So now that all of my trees are painted in, I'm going to paint the edges of my tile with a Posca paint pen. And I love just using a black Posca paint pen. It's acrylic paint. I just paint along the edges of the tile. It gives it a nice clean finish. So that way, when I present this tile, it looks clean and finished without, Aurora Borealis drips all over the edges. And after I, paint the edges of this and sign the thing, then I, of course, give it a good sealing with 2 to 3 coats of Kmart varnish, usually very light sprays. And then after that, I use 6 coats of Golden's Archival UV Protectant Spray. Occasionally I lose count and it might be 5 or it might be 7 coats, but I try to do 6 because that's what's recommended from Golden to really get that good UV protection. Now, these are some acrylic markers, acrylic paint pens rather, that I got from Amazon. And I like to use these for my signature on things that have like a really dark color. So I just picked a blue paint pen to sign in the corner with my signature Vera script. And the first go of it wasn't exactly dark enough, so I went over it again. It happens, So that's pretty much it, folks. Thank you for sticking with me through this video. I enjoyed making it with you, and I'm glad that you took the time to watch the whole thing. If you fast forwarded through lots of it, you might have missed some interesting tips or tricks, but that's okay. We all have busy lives, and I know that listening to a half-hour video is not the easiest thing in the world for people to do, but there are some great tips in here. I hope you listened to my whole video, and I hope you learned something and you got something out of this. And that is that, guys. 2 big thumbs up. Bye-bye. Thanks so much.